This appearance wasn't just about a dress, it was a carefully timed moment that quietly said a lot about where Meghan Markle is right now. At a Hollywood fundraising gala filled with power players and cultural tastemakers, Meghan showed up alone, dressed in classic white, and honored a woman whose influence reaches far beyond fashion or fame. And while nothing about the night was controversial, every detail, from the gown to the guest list, sparked a bigger conversation that's easy to miss if you're only looking at the photos. Because this wasn't just a red carpet moment, it was a signal. And once you see the full picture, the timing becomes impossible to ignore. The moment Meghan Markle arrived at the 2026 15% Pledge fundraising gala, the visual impact was immediate. But the meaning behind it unfolded more quietly. Held at Paramount Studios in Los Angeles, the event honored Tina Knowles, a business leader, cultural force, and longtime advocate for creative ownership and representation. According to publicly available information, the gala brought together figures from fashion, media, wellness, and entertainment, not for spectacle, but for purpose. Meghan entered wearing a custom white strapless gown by Harbison Studio. The design was understated but deliberate. A sculpted silhouette, a sweetheart neckline edged in black, and a dramatic black shawl extending into a long train. It evoked classic Hollywood glamour. Not nostalgia, but restraint. And that distinction matters, because in an era where celebrity appearances often compete for attention through excess, this look did the opposite. It slowed the room down. Observers noted that Meghan appeared relaxed and engaged throughout the evening, seated near the front, smiling and speaking with fellow attendees. There was no performance, no staged moment, just presence. And notably, she attended the event without Prince Harry. Not as a statement, not as an explanation. Just a fact, and one that quietly shifted the focus. This wasn't about royal optics, it was about alignment. But here's where the night gets more interesting, because the person being honored wasn't chosen at random. And Meghan's connection to her runs deeper than most headlines mention. Tina Knowles isn't just widely known as the mother of Beyoncé and Solange. She's a businesswoman who built brands, managed creative empires, and consistently emphasized ownership and self-definition, themes that have increasingly appeared in Meghan's public work. Just months earlier, Knowles appeared on Meghan's podcast, Confessions of a Female Founder. During the episode, she spoke openly about the realities of working with family, leadership, and long-term vision. She also shared advice that resonated far beyond the conversation itself, reminding listeners, and perhaps Meghan as well, that confidence isn't granted by permission, but claimed by choice. Publicly available clips from the podcast show a candid exchange, not performative, not promotional, but reflective. And that context reframes Meghan's presence at the gala. She wasn't just attending, she was supporting someone whose philosophy mirrors her own evolving direction. What makes this moment stand out even more is what came before it. Just weeks earlier, Meghan had appeared alongside Prince Harry at the Sundance Film Festival. Dressed casually, speaking about their new documentary, blending into a space built on storytelling rather than spectacle. No dramatic gowns, no Hollywood framing, just purpose-driven visibility. Then suddenly, classic glamour. Paramount Studios, a legacy-focused honoree, and a solo appearance. Two public moments, two very different visual languages, and both intentional. So what does this contrast actually tell us, and why are so many people quietly reevaluating Meghan's public strategy because of this one night? The answer isn't about fashion, it's about positioning. By choosing this event, this designer, and this cause, Meghan placed herself in a specific cultural lane. Not royalty, not influencer, not activist, but something more fluid, a connector. Someone who moves between media, philanthropy, and storytelling without needing to announce it. Even the guest list reflected that balance. Attendees included artists, entrepreneurs, wellness voices, and fashion leaders. Not a tabloid crowd, but a network-driven one. And in that environment, Meghan didn't dominate the narrative. She fit into it, which, according to observers familiar with celebrity branding, is often the strongest move of all. But the most overlooked detail of the night wasn't the gown, or the absence of Prince Harry, or even the celebrity guest list. It was what didn't happen, and why that may matter more than anything else. Because this gala may be pointing toward a much larger shift that hasn't fully surfaced yet, and that's where the story really begins. What made this night especially notable wasn't what unfolded on stage. It was how quietly everything else aligned around it. In recent years, Meghan Markle's public appearances have often been filtered through expectation, speculation, commentary, and constant comparison. But this gala offered something different. According to attendees and coverage from the event, nothing dramatic happened. No headline-grabbing remarks, no unexpected interactions, no carefully engineered viral moment. And that absence tells its own story. Because in high-visibility spaces like this, silence is rarely accidental. So why would a global figure choose restraint at a moment that could easily generate buzz? The answer may lie in how Meghan's public role has been gradually shifting, not away from visibility, but toward control. Publicly available information suggests that her recent projects focus less on reaction and more on authorship. Podcasts centered on leadership, media appearances tied to storytelling, documentary work rooted in lived experience rather than commentary. This gala fits seamlessly into that arc. Rather than positioning herself as the center of attention, Meghan aligned herself with a cause that speaks to long-term influence, the 15% Pledge, an initiative encouraging greater representation and access in business and creative industries. By attending as a supporter, not a spokesperson, she reinforced a subtle but important distinction. She wasn't there to explain herself. She was there to stand alongside someone else. That choice also reframed the conversation around her fashion. The gown wasn't designed to dominate the moment. It anchored it. The black and white contrast, the classic lines, the absence of excess detailing, all of it echoed a familiar Hollywood language without leaning into nostalgia. Fashion historians often note that classic silhouettes are used during moments of transition, when the message isn't about trend, but continuity. And continuity is exactly what this appearance suggested. But there's another layer here, one that doesn't show up in photos at all. Throughout the evening, Meghan was seen engaging in quiet conversation, listening more than speaking, interacting without performance. According to people's observations, she appeared genuinely at ease, not guarded, not rehearsed. In celebrity culture, comfort can be more revealing than confidence. It suggests someone who knows why they're in the room. And this room mattered. Paramount Studios isn't just a venue, it's a symbol of media legacy. Generations of stories have been shaped within its walls. Choosing that space for a fundraising gala centered on ownership and representation added weight to the message. For someone increasingly involved in content creation and production, the symbolism was hard to miss. Naturally, some noticed that Prince Harry wasn't present, but what's important is how little attention that detail actually demanded. There were no explanations offered, no clarifications issued, no visible effort to frame the absence. And in doing so, the narrative stayed exactly where it belonged, on the purpose of the event. This approach aligns with a broader pattern, separating personal life from professional presence without dramatizing either. Not everything needs a headline. Not every absence needs a reason. Sometimes neutrality is the strategy. So if this wasn't about spectacle, and it wasn't about distancing, what was the real message of this appearance? It may have been about credibility. By showing up consistently at industry events, philanthropic initiatives, and creative spaces, Meghan has been building something quieter than influence, but arguably more durable: trust. Trust that she isn't there for a moment, but for momentum. Trust that her involvement isn't reactive, but intentional. Trust that when she aligns with a cause, it reflects shared values rather than convenience. Honoring Tina Knowles reinforced that perception. Knowles represents longevity, adaptability, and behind-the-scenes leadership, qualities that don't demand attention but earn it over time. And by standing beside her, Meghan positioned herself within that lineage. But this gala may only be the visible surface of a much larger shift. Because when you connect this appearance with Meghan's recent media choices, partnerships, and creative direction, a pattern begins to emerge, one that suggests the next chapter isn't about redefining herself. It's about defining the space she wants to operate in. And that raises a bigger question, one that goes beyond fashion, philanthropy, or even celebrity. What happens when someone stops reacting to the narrative and starts building their own? When you step back and look at this gala in context, it becomes clear that it wasn't an isolated appearance. It was part of a longer rhythm. Over the past year, Meghan Markle's visibility hasn't increased dramatically. Instead, it's become more selective, fewer appearances, clearer purpose, more control over the environment. This fundraising gala fits that pattern perfectly. Rather than attending events that generate instant headlines, she's been choosing spaces that emphasize credibility over attention, rooms where influence is measured quietly through relationships and shared values. And that's where the real shift becomes visible, because this isn't about stepping back from the public eye. It's about changing how visibility works. In media strategy, there's a concept often referred to as earned presence. It's when someone doesn't need to introduce themselves, explain their role, or justify why they're there. They simply belong in the room. At the 15% Pledge Gala, Meghan wasn't framed as a guest of honor, a speaker, or a headline. She was a participant, seated among peers, supporting a friend, engaging without performance. That positioning matters. It suggests a move away from symbolic visibility and toward functional presence, where the value comes from participation, not perception. The choice of Tina Knowles as the focal point reinforces this interpretation. Knowles has long operated outside the spotlight while shaping outcomes behind it. Her influence isn't loud, but it's lasting, built through mentorship, business acumen, and cultural awareness. By publicly supporting her, Meghan aligned herself with that model of leadership, not the loudest voice in the room, but one that helps decide what the room stands for. And then there's the question of timing. This gala took place at a moment when Meghan's creative and philanthropic work appears to be entering a more consolidated phase. Her podcast conversations have centered on founders and builders. Her documentary work has focused on storytelling with intention. Her public messaging has emphasized autonomy, collaboration, and long-term vision. Seen through that lens, the classic Hollywood glamour wasn't a throwback. It was a signal of arrival, not into celebrity culture, but into legacy spaces. Spaces where appearance isn't about reinvention, but confirmation. Even the contrast with her recent Sundance appearance reinforces this point. At Sundance, she blended in, prioritizing message over image. At the gala, she stood out, but without overpowering the moment. Two different tools, used intentionally, both serving the same direction. So what does all of this add up to? It suggests that Meghan isn't trying to reclaim a narrative. She's outgrowing it. Rather than responding to speculation or public curiosity, she's letting consistency do the work. Showing up where values align, supporting people who reflect the future she's building, and doing it without commentary. In a media environment driven by reaction, that kind of patience can feel almost radical, but it's also effective, because when attention isn't demanded, it tends to linger longer. And this is where the story opens into its next phase. Because if this gala represents consolidation, a quiet confirmation of direction, then the logical next step isn't another appearance. It's output, projects, partnerships, work that reflects the positioning we're seeing now. The question isn't if that moment is coming, it's how intentional it will be, and who will still be paying attention when it arrives. When moments like this are stripped of noise, what remains is clarity. Meghan Markle's appearance at the 15% Pledge fundraising gala wasn't about reclaiming attention or redefining identity. It was about showing what stability looks like when it no longer needs explanation. A classic gown, a focused cause, a room built on shared values rather than spectacle. Nothing dramatic happened, and that may be exactly the point. Because influence doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it settles quietly into place, waiting to be noticed by those who understand what they're seeing. This gala offered a snapshot of that transition, from reaction to intention, from visibility to positioning, from moment to momentum. And in a media culture that thrives on immediacy, that kind of patience can feel almost invisible. But it's often where the real work begins. What this moment ultimately invites is a broader understanding, not just of Meghan Markle, but of how modern public figures evolve. Not by saying more, not by explaining everything, but by choosing where to stand and who to stand beside. And once that choice is made, the narrative tends to follow on its own. If this gala marked a quiet confirmation of direction, the next question becomes unavoidable. What does that direction produce? Because appearances like this don't exist in isolation, they usually precede something more tangible. And that's where the story continues.